Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I wanted to take a break from all my political, economic, foreign affairs discussions over the course of the last couple of weeks because of the federal election campaign. And today on Good Friday, talk about this idea of wampum, which I think is really interesting. The way that people would create treaties. Our indigenous brothers would have created treaties, and they did so 200, 300, 400, 500 years ago. And then on Monday, for Easter Monday, I've got a really interesting discussion about gratitude. And I think you'll find it really quite interesting with a wonderful lady who's been through a lot and has come out the other side through an incredible amount of resilience and strength. Lydia Nora is her name, and I encourage you to listen in on Monday to talk about gratitude and how that has really fueled her resilience, her resurgence, her rebirth. And so I thought that I'd spend a couple of minutes, if I could, talking about rebirth, not from a religious resurrection standpoint, but from a spring or new beginnings or rebirth. Because I think with Easter, with Passover, with Eid, with an election and change, where who knows who's going to become the next prime minister, whatever the scenario, we're thinking about a new beginning. And I think that this weekend gives us an opportunity to give some thought to a new beginning. And so I want to talk about how I think that happens and some lessons that I've learned over my life and my career. I think the first and most important thing is a journey of self-reflection and introspection. And I think you find that out best through meditation, through some quiet times and weekends, long weekends where you can take some walks, where you can sit, which I'm planning on doing, on a deck and watching a sunset, maybe having a drink, having a coffee, having a tea, having a hot chocolate, whatever it is, and thinking about life and thinking about the way that you react to things. And are there patterns that repeat in your life? And getting control over your emotions and how you can get control over emotions. Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, your unconscious will direct your life, and yet you'll call it fate. And so I think you need to try to make the unconscious conscious. You need to try to figure out what it is in your mind that is controlling you. And I think that there's a couple of different ways for you to do that. The first, as I mentioned, is self-reflection, introspection, and looking at the patterns in your life. And everyone's got patterns that they follow. I've got patterns. You've got patterns. We do things over and over again until and unless we break those patterns. The second is we got to break a cycle of negative talk. I think too often we tell things to us constantly, to ourselves, that is negative. And I'm not into positive thinking and The Secret and just, say something, it'll come true. But I do think that confidence and looking at your strengths and focusing on those strengths and amplifying those strengths is key and important. And I think the imposter syndrome and overly focus on the negatives and overly focusing on your problems, maybe some manifestation works from a negative standpoint as well as from a positive standpoint. If you keep telling yourself whatever it is that you dislike about yourself or you think that's negative about yourself, maybe that will accentuate. The best example I gave that is I used to play football in high school, and the football coach always said, look at the hole, because if you look at the tackler, you're going to get tackled. But if you look at the hole, the space between the two tacklers, you got a really good chance of making it through the hole. But if you look at the tackler, you're going to worry about the tackler and you're going to get tackled. And I think that that's a pretty good rule in life. I think that we've got to embrace change and growth. Life is about change. Life is a journey about change. And so therefore resisting it all the time and always wanting things to stay the same probably isn't the right attitude in life. And so, and we're going to talk about this on Monday. I think that, it's not necessarily banging your head against the concrete wall over and over again, maybe about pivoting, but it's knowing where you want to go. And yet working, the other line that's used is that you don't fight the wind if you're in a sailboat, you use the wind. And so therefore you can go back and forth and still get to where you want to get. So pivot, persistence, know where you're going, but be willing to change, be willing to pivot, because that's what life is all about. And then I think you gotta be compassionate about yourself. You gotta have self-compassion. You gotta understand that you're not perfect. No one is. You make mistakes, and you can move on. And I think that's critically important. I think then if you've got that self-awareness and you've gone through that process of trying to figure out who you are and what patterns you've felt, I think the next step is to think about how you then have impact on others. And there's three things I'm going to suggest in that regard. The first is mindfulness, meditation, and considering your surroundings in a far more introspective manner. And you've done that already on yourself, but now do it with the rest of the world. And then with that, find empathy. Find empathy for other people. And empathy is more than sympathy. Empathy is actually understanding people in their own reality and what is genuinely impacting them. Put yourself in their shoes, walk a mile in their shoes, et cetera, et cetera. And then I think you got to develop some social skills, and all of us can be better at that. And think about communication skills, think about conflict resolution skills, think about teamwork, et cetera. And that takes you sort of out of yourself and thinking about others, which I think is critically important. And so therefore, I've got a couple of different suggestions on getting from yourself to others. And the first is active listening. And we've always heard about that, but it's really listening to people, repeating back some of the things they say, making sure you understand it. It's that old thing from the 1 Minute Manager about first seek to understand, then seek to be understood. You gotta open yourself up. Jimmy Pattison, my old buddy, used to tell me that you've got two ears and one mouth for a reason. So you listen twice as hard, twice as much as you talk. I think then we've got to think about constructive feedback. Too often we criticize. Change it to constructive feedback, giving people suggestions, listening to them, helping them through whatever the problems are that they have. But more importantly than that, it's appreciation and recognition of the positives. Too often we just focus on the negatives and not the positives. I read this one book once, which I didn't listen to often enough, but it was called The Mathematics of Marriage, that said that people overly focus on the negatives. So you got to have 7 positives for every 1 negative. And I like that. And so think about appreciation and recognition and effectively finding the positives in other people and amplifying them. Thinking about conflict management. We all end up with conflict, and we got to find ways to dial it down and calm things down so we can have rational, reasonable conversations. And then setting boundaries and making sure that and other people know sort of what you're all about, and communicating what those are so that you have healthy relationships with people. 3 of the ways that I found this to be very successful, so that I understand where I am and where I'm going and what I want to achieve, through meditation, through thinking, through prayer, through walks in the forest or walks on the beach or just sitting on the deck and watching the sunset, is putting together a vision board. And I've done this with just words, and I've done this with pictures, and it really helps. And think about putting a picture on the wall of what you want to achieve, who you want to be, what you want to accomplish. Journaling, writing down what you're grateful for, what you want to achieve, what good things happen, what bad things happen, so that you can learn. And then I think one of the most powerful suggestions I got from a professor once was write your own eulogy. And if you don't like what you think someone would say about you, you know what you're going to change. And probably in your eulogy, you're going to write those things that you really mind, you really care about, you really are your ambition in life. And that's kind of an interesting idea. So if nothing else this weekend, take some time to think about rebirth. And would you like to achieve it? And if you wanted to achieve it, what would you do? What would you change? What patterns would you try to have a better response to? And how would you deal with people better in your lives? And then think about a vision board, a journal, a statement on a wall, or write your own eulogy and see if you actually like what people would say about you. Anyway, have a great long weekend, everyone. The best of Good Friday, those people that are celebrating, and celebrating sometimes sounds like the wrong word for Good Friday, but I think it is a celebration of the process, the passion, the 3-day of Christ's last days, and then also the excitement of the positive energy from the promise of Easter. My mom, who was very religious, and I try to follow her, always used to say that we are an Easter people because she was always about rebirth. And I love that. Have a great weekend, everyone. Good night.